Welcome to Revisit Books podcast, where we turn books into bite-sized wisdom you can use every day. We are starting off today with a really monumental piece of work. It's one of those books that forces you to just completely re-examine the relationship between your emotional life and your physical health.
That's exactly right. Today we're exploring Gabor Mate's book, When the Body Says No.
The stress-disease connection.
Right. That subtitle is key. And what makes this book so powerful is, it takes this ancient idea, this intuitive feeling that the mind and body are inseparable.
Something we all kind of know deep down.
We do. And he places that knowledge in really stark contrast to the modern medical model, which it often treats the body almost like a machine that's separate from the consciousness operating it.
Right, a collection of parts. And this book really asks, what if the source of chronic illness isn't just, bad luck with your genes or some environmental thing? What if it's an invisible, sustained internal conflict?
And Mate's whole mission here is to explore the effects of that hidden stress. Not the external stuff, like a work deadline, but the internal stuff, the kind that's programmed into us from our earliest emotional experiences.
He's looking at these subtle, lifelong patterns of emotional repression that we learn to survive. Patterns that eventually, he argues, become pathological.
And to really drive this point home, he anchors the whole book in the story of one of his patients, a woman named Mary, who is suffering from scleroderma.
And he describes her as meek, diffident.
Yeah, but what really struck him was the sheer volume of repressed emotion she was carrying. Her politeness, it wasn't just politeness, it was like a heavy, suffocating shield.
And her early life just set this terrible template for that. She was abused, abandoned, bounced between foster homes.
There's one memory he shares that is just chilling. She was 7 years old, huddled in an attic, trying to protect her younger sisters, while her drunken foster parents were just violently fighting downstairs.
And the lesson she learned from that crucible.
Yeah, the lesson was absolute. Expressing her own needs, her own feelings, it wasn't just unsafe, it was a direct threat to her survival and the survival of the people she was protecting.
So she developed this complete inability to say no. It was a profound emotional block.
And even as her scleroderma, which is a disease where the body's own connective tissues thicken and harden, even as it grew debilitating, she was compulsively taking responsibility for everyone around her, just pushing herself relentlessly.
She was taking on expectations that her body just couldn't handle anymore.
And this is the moment of insight for Mate. This is where it all clicks. He looked at her scleroderma, this physical process of her body hardening and rejecting itself, and he asked the crucial question.
Was her body finally enacting the refusal that her mind had been completely incapable of uttering its whole life?
It was the ultimate biological refusal, and that led him to write the medical column that basically launched this entire inquiry, where he wrote, "When we have been prevented from learning how to say no, our bodies may end up saying it for us."
That is just a beautifully concise and frankly terrifying thought.
Yeah.
That your own physiology becomes the final boundary setter when you can't.
But the beauty of this book is that it's not just psychology. It's not a metaphor. This connection between emotional suppression and physical breakdown is now rigorously supported by a pretty mature field of science.
Right, and that field is psychoneuroimmunology, or PNI.
PNI, yeah. For anyone who's really interested in the mechanics, PNI is where neuroscience, endocrinology, and immunology all meet. And it has just amassed this compelling evidence that shows an intimate two-way highway between our brain, our emotions, and our immune system.
So we now understand that how we respond to chronic stress isn't just psychological fallout.
No, it's a biochemical cascade that fundamentally alters our physical defenses. So PNI gives us the vocabulary, to move beyond just saying stress causes illness.
Right, it explains how.
It explains how the failure to assert a boundary or the need to repress a natural emotion, how that translates into conditions like scleroderma, rheumatoid arthritis, MS, all these chronic diseases whose origins are still often called unknown in traditional medicine.
It moves the whole discussion from, a philosophical idea to a verifiable biological fact.
Precisely. If we're going to talk about wellness, we absolutely have to talk about the PNI super system. It proves that the immune system isn't some autonomous fortress. It's an integrated part of our emotional apparatus.
Okay, so it's a very powerful premise. Who then should be really sitting up and paying attention right now? I mean, a lot of people think they know about stress, but Mate is talking about a kind of stress that's so embedded It's basically part of your operating system.
He is, and he's really addressing the emotionally repressed. I mean, this is vital reading for anyone who has struggled with a chronic illness and also fits a very specific pattern of emotional coping, a pattern that often involves a failure to even recognize, let alone honor, their own internal needs.
And this is a profile that I think a lot of us will recognize. It's that person who is simultaneously dealing with a serious chronic condition, but everyone around them sees them as the most supportive, most easygoing person in the room.
Exactly. We're talking about people who are frequently, almost pathologically, told they are too nice or placid. Yet they're struggling with these devastating illnesses like MS, ALS, fibromyalgia, IBD, autoimmune disorders.
And they're often just profoundly disconnected from their own
Oh.
internal world because they're prioritizing external harmony above everything else.
And the engine behind that disconnection is this constant unconscious performance. Mattei captured it perfectly when he said these individuals spend their lives as if under the gaze of a powerful and judgmental examiner whom they must please at all costs.
Wow. They're perpetually trying to win an approval that maybe they didn't get unconditionally as a child.
And that performance is biologically exhausting. I mean, it requires constant energy to keep that facade up, which keeps the body in this perpetual low-grade fight-or-flight state. Mattei uses the story of Natalie, an MS patient, to show this perfectly. She was the quintessential chronic helper.
Her story is just devastating because it shows the physical consequence of pushing past your body's explicit warnings. She couldn't maintain emotional boundaries, and her MS got dramatically worse right after a period where she had pushed herself to the breaking point caring for her sick husband.
But the ultimate betrayal, the thing that crushed her spirit, and you could argue her body, was that immediately after he recovered, her husband went on a golfing vacation and started an affair.
Unbelievable.
And when Mattei spoke with her, she even hesitated to identify the lesson in all of it. She said, I needed to know when to withdraw from my helping mode.
But then the compulsion just immediately took over again.
Instantly, she followed that up with the crushing sentence. But I just can't. If somebody needs help, I have to do it. Her body had screamed no through a severe MS flare, and her mind was still completely committed to saying yes to every external obligation.
She literally could not assert her own needs,
Yeah.
which is why her illness had to assert them for her.
And that's why this book is so crucial for people who experienced early emotional loss or deprivation. It might not have been, outright physical abuse. Mattei calls it proximate separation.
Let's unpack that term, because it's really key. It doesn't mean the parent was physically gone.
No, not at all. It
No.
means there was physical closeness, but a deep emotional void. So the parent might be present, feeding the child, clothing the child, but they themselves are chronically depressed or stressed or just emotionally unavailable.
And that creates this terrifying dilemma for the child.
It does. The child thinks, I need this connection to survive, but expressing my genuine, messy, painful feelings seems to distance or overwhelm the person I need the most.
So the child learns to repress, to push down anxiety, pain, jerry, anger, all the unacceptable emotions, just to maintain that relationship or what feels like security.
And if you're an adult who equates being busy with existing, or if you're a high achiever whose entire sense of worth is tied to what you do for others, Mattei is talking directly to the template that was laid down by that childhood survival strategy.
Okay, let's turn to the mechanics then. Let's move from the stories and into the hard science of this. Takeaway number 1. The biophysiological cost of repression and how this P&I supersystem translates emotional silence into physical disease.
Right. This is where we have to stop thinking of emotions as just these airy psychological things. The P&I supersystem, this interwoven network of the psyche, the nervous system, the hormonal system, the immune system, it proves that emotions are profoundly biological.
They're actual discharges in the body.
Literally, electrical, chemical, and hormonal discharges designed to mobilize our bodies for action.
So if anger is a biological discharge preparing us to defend ourselves, and sadness helps us process loss, what happens when we consistently suppress that? We just push it down.
When emotions like anger or grief or fear are repressed, meaning they're dissociated from our conscious awareness, we interrupt that natural physiological cycle. The electrical and chemical signals, they don't just vanish, they hang around, disorganizing the body's physiological defenses.
And instead of being protectors, they go haywire.
They go haywire and start attacking the body itself, which is, that's the literal definition of an autoimmune condition. The system gets confused because the internal danger signal is never resolved.
And the command center for this constant state of alert is the famous HPA axis. We really need to understand this mechanism because it is the hub linking our deepest emotional stresses to, well, systemic physical decay.
The HPA axis, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal, is the hormonal hub of the stress response. So when the brain detects a threat, and it doesn't matter if it's a lion or the need to repress anger to please your boss,
The body doesn't know the difference.
it doesn't. The hypothalamus signals the pituitary, which signals the adrenal glands to flood the body with stress hormones, mainly cortisol.
And in the short term, that's brilliant. This is how we survive. But when this system is chronically activated, what are the specific consequences? Mattei talks about a stress triad.
Yes, the classic stress triad you see in sustained stress involves three key physiological changes. First, the adrenal glands enlarge because they're just constantly working overtime producing cortisol.
Yep.
Second, the lymphoid organs, which are crucial for immune function, like the spleen and the thymus, they actually shrink and become less effective. And third, the intestinal lining can become ulcerated.
So the chronic presence of cortisol is what makes this so dangerous. It's the great inhibitor. It's like a constant dampener on the immune system, but it doesn't stop there.
Exactly. Chronically high levels of cortisol suppress the immune system, making us more susceptible to illness. But beyond that, cortisol has these severe systemic side effects. It has a significant ulcerating effect on the gut lining, which perfectly explains the link between chronic emotional stress and things like IBD and ulcers.
And the bone.
And the bones. It has potent bone-thinning actions. Mattei notes that stressed and depressed individuals consistently secrete high levels of cortisol, providing a direct biochemical link between their emotional states and physical decay in multiple systems at once.
It's like a perpetual energy crisis where the body is just overspending its budget on an internal emergency that never, ever ends.
And what's fascinating is that Mattei distills all the countless external factors in our lives down to three universal internal factors that, when they're present, they inevitably trigger this dangerous HPA cascade.
And what are those three?
Uncertainty, the lack of information, and the loss of control. If you look at patients with chronic illnesses like cancer or scleroderma, all three of those factors are acutely present. And what's more, many of these people spent their entire adult lives operating under the illusion of control.
Right, an illusion that was driven by their deep-seated childhood conditioning.
An illusion that is then shattered by disease.
Absolutely shattered.
Yeah.
I mean, think of Alan, the esophageal cancer patient in the book. He worked 11 hours a day, 7 days a week, and he insisted that his work stress was good stress. He was in complete denial about the lack of intimacy in his marriage and his deep feelings of resentment.
He had total control over his work schedule, but zero control over his internal emotional landscape. And it took a severe, life-threatening illness to force him to realize that this relentless pursuit of duty and control was biologically unsustainable.
The body just refuses to be governed by that illusion any longer.
It does. It says no.
So if chronic stress is the mechanism, the next big question is why certain people seem to be more susceptible. This brings us to takeaway number 2, the disease-prone personality. This is the individual who is trapped in compulsive niceness.
This is a personality pattern that Mattei observed consistently across cancer patients, MS patients, ALS, autoimmune patients. And it's so critical to understand this is not genuine kindness, which comes from an internal place. This is a compulsive need to please.
It's an inability to set boundaries, to say no.
Right. It's the denial of personal pain or suffering and this chronic, overwhelming sense of responsibility for the emotional well-being of everyone else.
And the key distinction here, which I think prevents accusations of victim blaming, is that these are not innate character flaws. They are sophisticated coping mechanisms.
Precisely. They are adaptations that were adopted in childhood for emotional survival. The child learned that their authentic self, their anger, their pain, their sadness, was not acceptable or safe. So they presented this hyper-responsible, perpetually pleasant facade to secure the attachment they needed.
And that facade becomes the prison of the adult.
And Mattei uses ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, as the most striking, almost terrifying, extreme example of this niceness compulsion.
The pattern they find in ALS patients is historically and clinically just shocking.
It is. Mattei cites a Yale study from 1970 that identified 2 lifelong patterns distinguishing these patients. First, rigidly competent behavior, a total inability to ask for or receive help. And second, the chronic exclusion of all negative feelings like fear, anxiety, and sadness.
They often discuss their devastating physical decline in this very casual, highly controlled way, often masking severe discomfort with an almost inappropriately engaging smile.
The story about the Cleveland Clinic neurologists is chilling. They published a paper called Why Are Patients with ALS So Nice? But the electrodiagnostic technologists, the ones who measured nerve viability, they had their own non-scientific but almost invariably correct assessment method.
They would say.
They would frequently say, this patient cannot have ALS, he or she is not nice enough. The prediction of a physical disease was based on an emotional assessment of the patient's capacity to ask for help or express genuine distress.
Wow. It suggests this level of rigid pleasantness, this concealment of internal life, is so tightly bound to the disease process that it becomes almost diagnostic.
Which leads directly to what Mate calls the role trap. People like Lou Gehrig, who famously played baseball with 17 separate fractures in his hands, or Stephen Hawking, who resisted assistance even as he struggled to walk.
They were trapped in this heroic role of strength and competence. They could not be vulnerable.
They lived these driven lives dedicated to achievement. And Mate notes that this drivenness, this constant need to do, is often filling a huge cavern where a strong sense of self should be. It's not an addiction to work, it's an aversion to the void that opens up when they stop performing.
So if this self-imposed role is the trap, Mate offers a framework for escaping it. He calls it emotional competence. This is the capacity we need to protect ourselves from chronic, self-inflicted stress.
And this goes way beyond just managing stress. First is a capacity to actually feel our emotions. This sounds so basic, but many of the patients he discusses have deeply dissociated from their own feelings. They're unaware, they're stressed or angry until the body just screams.
And second,
Second is the ability to express those emotions effectively, which means asserting your needs and maintaining boundaries without resorting to, aggressive rage or passive-aggressive behavior.
and the third and fourth elements are about internal clarity and self-awareness, which are vital for breaking that cycle of repression.
Third is the ability to distinguish your present reactions from the unconscious residue of the past. So, the adult reaction to a boss's critique shouldn't be the same paralyzing fear the child felt when a parent withdrew their love. And finally, the fourth element is the awareness of our genuine needs, not just repressing them to gain external approval or maintain a facade of competence. In virtually every case of serious illness Mate explored, one or more of these aspects of emotional competence were unconsciously compromised.
We've established that this disease-prone personality is rooted in these childhood coping mechanisms. So let's move to takeaway number 3, the intergenerational template and the biology of belief. How does that initial programming actually get laid down?
Mate really emphasizes that the template for our stress response is often laid down by early emotional deprivation. And again, we're circling back to that idea of proximate separation. The child is physically close to the caregiver, but there's an emotional void.
So the parent is too anxious or depressed or overwhelmed to be emotionally attuned to the child.
Right. And what happens then is a physiological and psychological adaptation that serves the child in the short term, but it really damages the adult in the long term. The child's nervous system learns to avoid generating signals that cause distress in the caregiver.
So they learn that the acceptable version of themselves, the compliant, cheerful, helpful part, is the only part that guarantees security.
And the rest of it, the anger, the fear, the neediness, it all gets walled off. And this laying down of nerve circuits becomes the template for all future relationships and all future stress responses.
And this early programming, it translates into a set of unconscious core beliefs that keep the system overloaded for the rest of their lives. Let's get into some of those specific beliefs. The first one is that defense mechanism of strength.
The belief is, I have to be strong enough. This was a patient named Iris who suffered from lupus, and she absolutely rejected the idea of not being strong enough because to her, that meant she was a wimp or inadequate.
It's a desperate defense mechanism.
Totally. If a child perceives their parents can't support them or are too weak to handle their needs, the child learns to just handle everything themselves. The fastest way to avoid the terrifying feeling of rejection is to never admit vulnerability, to never ask for help.
The next toxic belief centers on emotional expression, particularly anger.
Right, it's not right for me to be angry, which comes from the deeper fear. If I'm angry, I will not be lovable. We saw this with Alan, the esophageal cancer patient. He explicitly admitted his anger had been chronically repressed because of his deep-seated desire to be liked.
The belief system is simple. Anger equals rejection.
Exactly. So he has to present this relentlessly agreeable facade, no matter how much resentment is building up inside. That fear of conflict, rooted in the fear of abandonment, is just endemic in people who develop these conditions.
Then there's the belief related to activity. I don't exist unless I do something.
This was Joyce, a university professor with debilitating asthma. And this illustrates that cavern we mentioned earlier. She described feeling an incredible emptiness whenever she wasn't actively achieving or fulfilling demands. The constant pushing was an attempt to fill that internal void.
So her asthma flare-ups, her body refusing to take in air, or her physical system saying no to that terrifying psychological void.
And finally, a belief that just perfectly illustrates the psychological and really societal cost of this denial. I have to be very ill to deserve being taken care of.
This was Angela, diagnosed with uterine cancer. She'd struggled with bulimia, depression, fibromyalgia. But she admitted that only her cancer felt real enough, legitimate enough, to finally justify her leaving a toxic, demanding job.
She needed that physical diagnosis to grant herself permission to prioritize her own needs. Her core belief was that mood disorders or bulimia were not enough because they were emotional or, seen as self-inflicted.
Like cancer.
But cancer, that was a real physical illness that she could use to justify taking care of herself in the eyes of her family and her peers. It's a stunning, tragic indictment of how we prioritize physical ailments over emotional suffering.
What's truly fascinating is the connection Mattei draws between repressed emotion and even cognitive decline. He brings up the famous longitudinal study of aging nuns.
Right, the nun study. Researchers analyzed the youthful memoirs of these women written decades earlier, and they found that the nuns whose memoirs expressed a paucity of ideas and used less vivid or emotionally complex language were significantly more likely to develop clinical Alzheimer's as they aged.
So a lack of emotional vitality in early adulthood correlated with neurological disease decades later.
Yes, and he connects this emotional poverty to figures like Ronald Reagan. The great communicator was a master of emotional management, but he was also characterized by a deep emotional paralysis. His famous line to express emotion was, "Really, there are no words."
A defense mechanism.
A defense mechanism he adopted early on against the chaos of his father's alcoholism. This chronic repression and denial mirrors the emotional paucity seen in the nuns who developed Alzheimer's. It seems the brain's failure to engage deeply with emotional reality correlates with its later systemic failure.
Okay, so if the root of the illness is this lifelong pattern of unconscious beliefs and coping styles, then the path to healing, our final takeaway, it must require a complete shift in our internal perception. It's about reversing the biology of belief.
Absolutely. Mattei is clear that we have to move beyond just external treatments. We have to change the internal milieu. And the very first step, which is so counterintuitive in our culture, is abandoning the idea of compulsive positive thinking.
Right, the idea that we can just meditate our problems away or force ourselves to be happy.
Exactly. Compulsive optimism is often just another high-level defense mechanism. It's a way to bind anxiety to avoid confronting painful truths. True healing requires what Mattei calls the power of negative thinking.
That sounds provocative, but what it really means is radical honesty.
It means the willingness and the courage to gaze unflinchingly at what does not work in your life, in your relationships, in your self-perception. Genuine positive being isn't achieved by denying sadness or hurt or anger. It's achieved by embracing the truth of your experience.
Let's break down the 7 A's of emotional competence that Mattei outlines as the path forward. It starts with the foundation, acceptance.
Acceptance is the courage to recognize how things are right now, in this moment, without denial or self-judgment. It is not resignation. It's not saying, "I give up." It is the powerful refusal to deny your current reality, no matter how painful.
Next is awareness.
Awareness is about recognizing and identifying your true needs and feelings. If you spend a lifetime suppressing emotion, this means actively listening to your subtle internal signals. It means shifting from self-judgment to compassionate attention for the parts of you that are scared.
The third A, anger, is the one that confuses people the most. How can anger be a healing mechanism?
He draws a really clear line. Rage is tension-driven. It's anxiety acting out. Healthy anger, in contrast, is physiological. It's described as a relaxation and a surge of power. When genuine anger is felt and expressed healthily, your voice lowers, your shoulders drop, muscle tension disappears.
So it's not aggression, it's assertion. It's the energy you need to finally say no.
Precisely. Look at Barbara Ellen, the woman dying of breast cancer. Mate describes her finally setting clear boundaries with her mother in the final 6 months of her life. She was achieving emotional autonomy and finally asserting her being before she died.
That distinction is essential. What about the fourth A, autonomy?
Autonomy is developing an internal center of control, learning to distinguish yourself from others. This is so crucial because, as Mate notes, immune confusion reflects a failure to distinguish self from non-self. The immune system literally attacks the body.
So psychologically, you have to establish that clear internal boundary.
Yes.
This is me, that is not me.
Yes. And the fifth A is attachment, which seems to contradict autonomy, but it's about choosing healthy connection.
Because loneliness is a major predictor of illness.
A huge predictor. Attachment means seeking out genuine, intimate connection and social support. It means regaining the vulnerability that we often shut down in childhood.
And the last two wrap up this internal transformation: assertion and affirmation.
Assertion is the declaration of being. I am who I am, irrespective of my achievements or my utility to others. It's about letting go of the need to perform. And affirmation is moving toward your spiritual or creative values, finding your deeper purpose. For Mate, it was his writing. For a patient, it was her spiritual connection.
So the whole journey really comes back to one crucial practical step we can all take: the responsibility of self-compassion.
Emotional competence begins with compassionate attention to the self. Instead of condemning yourself for not being able to say no, you can give compassionate attention to the part of you that is scared of rejection. Self-condemnation is incredibly expensive, biologically and emotionally. By choosing compassionate acceptance over self-judgment, you begin to reverse that biology of belief that was adopted so early in life.
That's today's breakdown. While this discussion cannot replace the book's full text, it can offer a glimpse into its teachings. I hope you found this discussion helpful, and I look forward to sharing more. Let me know what book next you want to discuss.